Welcome to Psyche Snacks. This is the podcast where we discuss mental illnesses and how to help those struggling with them. Today is a bit of a different episode because I am joined by a special guest. This is Julie Rice. She is a school counselor with a background in special ed and currently going to get another master's degree in school psychology. With no further ado, let's jump into the interview. So, how did you get into the field of school counseling?
I ended up, when I went to school, I was an elementary and special education major. And when I was doing special education, I really liked the testing portion of it. I liked being able to test children. And when I moved to Texas, the way that you became a tester was you had to teach for 3 years, then you got your school counseling licensure, and then you became an educational diagnostician, and that meant that you could test. So years later, um, I had a bunch of kids, and then when I was ready to go back to school, I went the school counseling route. And one, I realized I really liked it. And two, I realized that that was not the way that I was supposed to go to be able to test students. So, but I did really like it. I really liked being able to go in the schools and help students. So that's what I did. But now I'm currently going back to school to be a school psychologist, and I'm able to do most of the same things I can do as a school counselor, as well as doing the testing.
That's awesome. So, you went a little bit into your educational background there. But what did you have to go through in college? What kind of things do you have to learn? And what kind of degrees did you have to get?
Um, the degree I had to get was a master's degree in counseling with an emphasis in school counseling. That was 45 credits. I ended up taking a variety of counseling theories classes, how to do counseling. So, some of the basic classes on how to listen, how to repeat back, how to rephrase questions. I took group therapy, um, took multiculturalism, a social justice class, because that was something that my school was very much focused on. Um, I took a career counseling class. Um, and then I worked in both an elementary and a high school for my practicum and internship.
And when you said you took therapy, was that a group therapy class or actual group therapy?
Actually, a little bit of both. So as group therapy, we learned how the dynamics of it worked and what it was about. But one day a week, we were separated into groups of, I think, eight. And for an hour each week, we were in group therapy. So each person had to be the therapist in charge and sort of introduced. And there wasn't a topic. It was, whoever felt like talking talked. And so there was one time when I did some talking in terms of something that concerned me. And then another time I was the leader of the group and I listened to other people and some of the things that concerned them. So I got to be a participant as well as a leader of group therapy.
That's awesome. So, as a school counselor going into school psychology, what are your major duties and responsibilities and how will that change when you become a school psychologist?
So I'll tell you a little bit more of when I was a full time school counselor. Right now, I'm a part time school counselor. But when I was a full time school counselor, I gave weekly lessons in the elementary school. I would, if students were having difficulty, whether that was with um, bullying or with how they were feeling, I would talk to them. Sometimes parents would come in and would like some advice on things, so I would talk to parents. And sometimes teachers were having difficulty. And there were a few teachers that I talked to and by talking with them, encouraging them to not quit immediately and to stay till the end of the school year. So I was really happy with that. All the while keeping confidentiality because I can't tell my principal that there's teachers coming to talk to me and they want to quit. So so just trying to help them stay on, but also give them encouragement and things that they can do to help themselves. I also worked in the high school, um, and in the high school was when I probably had more students who were having more anxiety issues and difficulties. Um, so sometimes I would do suicide screeners and talk to them about that. Sometimes I would get a text or a phone call, hey, Julie, can you come back to the high school? So someone needs to talk to you. I'm like, well, do they need to talk to me this afternoon or can it wait till tomorrow morning? And sometimes I went back right then, and sometimes we chatted the next day.
So you mentioned you liked the testing aspect. So what does this testing entail?
So the testing that I do is some cognitive testing, which would be finding a student's IQ, seeing where how easy it is for them to learn. And that's really what an IQ is can you get things after a few repetitions? Then you're average. If you someone tells you something once and you got it, you're probably above average. And if it takes multiple times for you to understand a concept or a topic, then you're probably more below average. And so just knowing those things helps you maybe not feel as frustrated if you have to keep repeating yourself with a student, knowing that, you know what, they just need a few more times, a few more repetitions to understand something. There is also academic testing. So we get to see how much they know in terms of math, reading, writing, in regards to their grade level. So, how much they should know at that particular age or grade. And then we have some mental health measures. We have something called broadband measures. One of the biggest ones is the BASC, BASC. And the BASC helps you understand if there are critically significant indicators for depression, anxiety, hyperactivity, learning problems, and some adaptive skills. And then there's some more narrow band measures. Connors 4 is a new one, is a one that was more recently updated, and that really helps diagnose ADHD.
So do you see a lot of ADHD in your schools?
Yes.
I see a lot of people with ADHD at the pharmacy, so that
Yeah.
matches up.
So there are a lot of children who have been diagnosed with ADHD. They don't have to be diagnosed by me as a school psychologist, um, but they can be diagnosed by their doctor. Um, I know this is probably a side thing, but in terms of medication, my personal view on it, having had a child with ADHD, um, is that if a child has ADHD and it is not affecting their academics, then I probably wouldn't do medication and I would just do a lot more behavioral interventions, various reward systems, trying to help them learn how to handle their emotions, how to handle the activity and the impulsivity. But if a child's academics are being affected by the ADHD, meaning they have a hard time concentrating. They want to do the work, but they're thinking of, oh, this happened in kindergarten, this happened in first grade, and their mind isn't allowing them to focus. Then I would be more apt to think that medication would be helpful because we want a child to be able to concentrate enough to learn. And so that would mean, yes, they're on medication during school, but not necessarily on the weekends, not necessarily in the summer. That this is simply a tool that they need to be able to listen and concentrate well enough to learn.
So, I know as a pharmacy technician, a lot of ADHD medications go on shortages pretty often. Have you noticed how some of these shortages have affected the students that need to be taking this ADHD medication?
The shortages are more recent, and since I only right now I'm only working part-time, so I'm really only at the school a day, day and a half. And so I don't really have my pulse on which children are taking medication for ADHD and which are not. So I don't know that I can answer that question. Um, but I don't recall that there were any shortages when I was working full time, and I knew all the kids who were on ADHD medication then.
Okay. Well, that's good to know that it's not affecting people too much, at least in your experience. Because it feels bad when people call on the phone and say, I need my ADHD medication. I'm like, we're out of stock. I'm sorry. Not even our warehouse has any.
Oh, that is rough.
Yeah. So, what are some, what are the most important skills to have in your line of work?
Um, I think the most important skill to have is probably listening. Is being able to listen to what they're saying. Um, because many times, especially in the counseling field, people actually have a lot of their own answers within themselves. And by listening to what they're saying, by asking those questions to get them to think about things, um, I think a lot of times those answers can be pulled out of themselves. And when they come up with an idea, they're going to remember that more. They're going to think it's a better idea more often. And they may be able to then follow through with that. Because I can say, well, you said this is what you wanted, or you said you wanted to do this. Like, oh yeah, I guess I did. Okay, maybe I do want to do that kind of thing. So I think that the biggest thing is listening. And then the next one I think is the empathy. Um, Helping them understand that they aren't alone, that the feelings that they have are normal. I recall listening to a teacher who was struggling with a divorce, and she told me a couple things, and then I said, well, it sounds like you're feeling this way and this way. And I just kept being able to say, well, it sounds like this and this. And in the end, she goes, yeah, I feel those things. I said, I'm not a mind reader. What you're going through is normal. And so it's okay to be, you're feeling those things, because that is a normal way that humans would experience something. And so sometimes just even knowing that, yeah, this is really rough, but people who are in this position, that's how they feel. And I'm normal. That just makes people feel a lot better.
Yeah, it sounds like you were describing, you were mirroring the teacher. She was coming to you with these emotions, and you were comprehending those and simplifying them down. Like, it sounds like this is what you're going through, giving them a different perspective of the thing that's going on inside of them.
Hmm.
And that can help someone feel validated. And
Yes.
so, what's the best part of your job?
Um, so let's see. So the best part of my job, there's two things. Best part of my job is one, getting hugs from kindergarten students because they just love me, and that's just fun. And they are happy to see me, and they are just joyous, and so I really like that part of the job. And the other part of the job that I really like, I love talking to teenagers, the ones in high school, about what is it that you want to do with your life? I love doing the career counseling thing. Um, and honestly, I that never leaves me. So your sister's friends come in. So what are you doing with your life? Let's talk about this. Did you know about this? Oh, you want to do this? Hey, there's this program over here. Does that sound interesting to you? So I really enjoy giving people like, have you thought of this? And is this something that might be interesting to you? So that's probably one of the best things I like about my job.
I can tell. um, what's the hardest part of your job?
Knowing that I can't fix every problem, that every problem is not fixable. It used to be. So when I was doing my internship, I learned how to do the Columbia Suicide Screener. And I never gave it because one of the because and later on when I had a counselor subbing job, um, one counselor, it was 13 reasons why was up, and we were giving she was giving suicide screenings at least twice a week, but she didn't mind those. What she didn't like were the hygiene question, talking to child and telling them that they stink. So I said, well, I'll do that, you do suicide, I'll do hygiene. And I had no problem with that. um, but then when I went to Macedonia, there was a wonderful group of three of us who worked in the counseling department, and I taught them how to do the Columbia screener. And because I worked in elementary school, I never used it. But the other two worked in junior high and high school, so they were, whenever there were issues, they gave them they would do that. Well, it must have been maybe I don't know if it was my second or third year there. We had to do we had to interview three girls at the same time because we knew that if we interviewed one, she was going to tell her friends, and we weren't going to get right answers. So we're like, okay, we're going to take, each of us is going to take one. And I said, oh, I've never done one of these before. And they looked at me and they said, but you taught us how to do them. I said, well, I taught you how. I've never done one. So that was the first time that, that I gave one. And since then, it has been hard because I've had to do a lot. Um, I had to talk to a second grader who was having suicidal ideation. I talked to a 16-year-old. So another student had come into my office and said, hey, on Friday, one of the students said this, talked about killing themselves. And I was really glad to be that person that they felt they could tell. And so I called the student in, and whenever I would call the student in, and I think this always surprised me, um, I said, I heard that you talked about suicide. I'm going to ask you some questions. Regardless of what you say, I'm going to call your mom. Because as a counselor, I have some experience with this, but I don't ever want to say, oh, you're at a low risk, it's no big deal. I will call a parent every time and tell a parent no matter what has been said, I will say it's important for them to get outside help. And so I talked to this one student, and then and he had more of a um, moderate for suicide. And then I called in his mom, asked her to come in and do it face to face. I've had to do those on the phone before, and they just don't go well. So I had the mom come in, chatted with the young man, and um, later he went up to class, and I chatted with the mom alone, and I said, he knows you're busy, and he doesn't think that you have time for him. And she goes, if he needs me, I have time. I said, I know that. I know that you have time for him. And I know that you love him, but he just doesn't feel it right now. I said, I suggest you put away your phone, you put away a book, and you just sit there and say, hey, this is my time. If you don't want to use it, fine, but I'm just going to sit here and I am here for you. And you just do that every night. And that will help him know that you have that time for him and you are making him a priority. So that was that was it was a beautiful conversation with the mom on how to connect with her child. But I think those are some of the hard things when I'm hoping that that solved the problem, but I don't know. Or but there's a lot of kids you're like, if you just do this, it will be better, and they don't. And then they fail classes and they do these things, and you're like, the choices you're making, it's just not sustainable. It's just not going to be a good end for you. So that's the hard part.
I also know when you moved to Idaho, well, when we moved to Idaho, um, the counseling program was new.
Yeah.
How was that? How was that starting up a whole counseling program for a school?
I had done it in Macedonia. They didn't have one in Macedonia, and so I had started that one there. I'm a great reader. I love to read. I love books. That's not a shock to you.
No.
And so um, so one of the things I did when I was in Macedonia was find a lot of books that could teach various social emotional learning skills, books that could teach self-esteem, resilience, perseverance, books that could teach about bullying, peer pressure, honesty, communication, respect. So I would go through lots of books. I would look at them on YouTube and see if they were good enough. And so I gathered a large quantity of books, um, and then I would make lessons from them. Um, so I had already done that with already once. And so when I moved into Idaho, they didn't have one. And so I was able to take some of the things I had already done and I expanded it. So instead of doing lessons every other week, I did lessons every week. By the end, I added a parent newsletter on the back of all of the worksheets that the students would do. Things that, hey, here's the book we read. This is what it's about. Here are some questions you can ask your child, and here are some activities you can do to foster self-esteem, perseverance, resilience, whichever was the topic of that week. And then in the high school, um, we did I taught the kids how to do the FAFSA. We did a college week one time. We did a college application week where I got students to do college applications because Idaho really does make it easy for students to apply to college. Um, what else? This children did the SATs. Um, the children, I was the district testing coordinator, so I was also in charge of MAP testing. Um, and then for the high schoolers, I was really there for those emotional meltdowns, which happened. Um, and so sometimes kids would be having difficulties, and so I was just there to make sure that they were doing better. I had one student who he was a special education student, and his experiment in science did not go as planned, and so he wanted to do it all over again the next day. The problem was that the next day they were taking that experiment and they were doing something else with it. And so I pushed back um, and brought him into my office and I said, look, you have to, yes, you can have all of the equipment to do it at home another day, but tomorrow you need to be doing the next part of the experiment. Though yours didn't work out, you can use somebody else's. And he screamed and he yelled. And when he finally left, I was like, did nobody in the school hear this? I mean, it was not a soundproof room, but he was yelling. He was not violent, but he was so upset. Called his mom, told her what happened. Um, and the next day I sat in the class in science I was like, nope, I've got to be here. This is where I'm at. And they took, it was, they were making Tabasco. So they looked at somebody and they fermented peppers, but his got moldy. So they did one and they went through the whole process. It was pretty cool. And then they opened up somebody else's who was moldy. So, oh, we got to throw that away. And then they opened this young man's whose was also moldy. And so they had to throw it away. And he was very upset. He went out in the hallway and I followed him and we chatted. And eventually I said, you can help someone with theirs. He's like, yeah. I said, yeah. He goes, when can I do that? I said, as soon as you walk back in that room. And he walked back in the room and he helped somebody and he was able to make the Tabasco with somebody else's who had also worked well. And later I talked to him and I said, how'd it go? And he goes, I don't know why I was so upset. I said, okay, remember that. I mean, and I really count that as a win because I pushed him. I'm like, you are a senior. You need to be able to deal with something very small, but something that is disappointing. And you need practice with that. And this is a safe place to practice. And he was able to learn a little something from it. And then I called his mom and say, what an amazing thing happened today. I'll tell you about the bad stuff, but I'm also going to call you about the good stuff and just making sure. And so a special education director did not said probably shouldn't have pushed him. It's like, no, he needs to be pushed. I'm not pushing him a lot, but I'm pushing him just enough where it's uncomfortable. And he succeeded. So I have no idea what the question was. Did I answer it?
You brought up a lot of good points. The original question was about how it was getting started with a new counseling program,
Oh,
but
that's right. So no, so there were students who would need me at the high school, and I was there to help them.
hmm what was your you've had experience in school counseling in elementary, middle, and high school. What's been your favorite?
Um, Probably elementary, but I didn't like middle school. Middle school was fun because they had problems that they thought were so awful, but that were completely solvable, and I could really help them. So some of the high school problems are a little deep. I'm like, I don't know if I can help you with that. But the middle school problems, they thought that they were really hard, but they were very solvable. So I
hmm
don't know. I really liked them all. That was a neat thing about working in Idaho. It was a K to 12 school. So I was able to get the hugs from the kindergartners and the conversations from the high schoolers. And so I don't know. I really liked all the ages.
Yeah. I remember when I was in middle school, the principal, remember he would always say good morning to me and I would never
Yeah.
say it back because it started I was just too tired to talk. I didn't want to interact with anyone socially. And then it just became my thing. And if I were to suddenly change my thing, that would draw unnecessary attention to myself. And since I had a degree of social anxiety, that was like a no no for me. But then the principal did a low blow. He went to you and told you that he felt upset that I wasn't responding. And then I had this choice before me. Like, I can keep upsetting him and or I can just say good morning and do a small little thing. I can say good morning into my middle school brain. That I couldn't handle it. I'm like, what do I do? In the end, I settled on just not going through that entrance.
That's what I remembered. Like I think you just skirted the whole.
I
You had social anxiety.
yeah,
I don't think I knew that.
I've talked about it a little bit before, but um, that's why during every single parent teacher conferences, the teachers would tell me I should talk more. And I'm like, I can't. The thought of raising my hand makes my heart pound. So Yeah, instead of facing that social anxiety when I was pushed, I just avoided it completely by making things harder on myself by taking extra steps to go to the other entrance. Eventually, I did give in and say good morning to him. And then he stopped talking to me, thankfully. He's like, okay, she said good morning. That makes up for it. I'll let her have a pass. But he was cool. I thought that was a pretty funny story. So, you mentioned books earlier. Is there any good books or websites you would recommend to people that want to know more about school counseling
Oh, about school counseling.
or anything that helps in the field?
So, Spy the Lie is pretty good. That's helpful. Because on the very first time I had to give the Columbia Suicide Screener, the girl lied to me on the first two questions. And I'm like, I know she's lying because I read this book and she's like doing everything about the lying. And then, so I had to keep going with the questions. And finally, I got to one question and she like said, no. And I said, that's the first true answer you've told me today. And she just looked at me. So like, dang. It was like so blatant that she was lying to me on the screener. Um so that I thought was helpful. I'm trying to think. Hmm. My head is more into children's books and how parents can help do, like, I just wrote a paper on bibliotherapy and resilience. So it's the master's paper that we need to write. And then I included a 250-page appendix. Um,
I was going to ask if you wanted to share it with me, but maybe not anymore.
so I have just the paper, but what it was my paper was going to be how helping parents um, with bibliotherapy and their kids. And my professor says, well, why don't you add teachers in there? I said, okay.
Make it
And
longer?
well, and so I mean, it really wasn't a whole lot of extra that I added. So, but I'm adding teachers here and there. I had another extra couple paragraphs about that. But I said, I can't tell a teacher one more thing to do. Teachers are overwhelmed, they're overworked. And so if I said, oh, you've got your classes, doesn't have perseverance. Here's a book. Here are some guidelines. You can do that bibliotherapy. No, but the appendices simply had lesson plans for every book that I suggested. So if there was a book on self-esteem, the appendix would have a lesson plan, a worksheet, and a parent letter. And that is more doable for a teacher. A teacher can go, oh, okay, here's the book, here's a lesson plan, and my lesson plans are very simple. Here's something the kids can work on, and here's a letter to parents. I could actually do that. So that's what my 250 pages was just a lot of lesson plans for teachers and all the books. Um, so there's three fun children's books that I think are really awesome. I'll just tell you three. One is called The Little Red Fort. So if you've heard the story The Little Red Hen, where she you're just so young. Okay. So it's an old book. It's an old book. So The Little Red Hen is a story about this hen who says, I want to make, who wants to plant the wheat with me?
Oh, I
And the
have I have read that book. Don't worry, I'm
okay.
not as young as you think.
I know exactly how old you are. But um so basically she says, who wants to, and all of her friends, the dog and the duck and whatever, all say no, no, no. And then she's like, who wants to help me eat the bread? And they're like, me. And she goes, tough. You didn't help. So the Little Red Fort, it's a story of, and it's the main character is Latino, and she wants to build a fort. So she's like, who wants to make the plans? And her brothers all say no. And so she makes plans for this fort. Who wants to cut the stuff? And her brothers say no, but like Her abuela is there helping her. Her mom's there helping her. You know, who wants to? So there's all the different steps to make the fort. And then in the end, she's like, who wants to play with her fort? And her brothers are like, yeah, me. And she goes, tough. You didn't help. So her brothers, one brother made a mailbox. The other one painted the fort. The other one planted flowers. And then they all got to play. So I like that that was a little bit of a better ending. The other book that I think is really kind of cool, um, and the next two books you can use for not only children, but they have like that deeper meaning for adults. So one is called The Little Mouse and the Red Wall. And it's a story of a mouse, and he's there with his friends, the lion, and whatever other animals that are in there. And there's this big red wall, and he's asking questions. What's on the other side of the wall? They're like, oh no, it's scary, it's scary. Can't go over there, can't go over there. And he keeps asking questions because he wants to go over there. Well, a bird comes in, and so the mouse asks, oh, what's on the other side of the wall? And the bird says, oh, I'll tell you. I'll show you. So the mouse gets on the back of the bird. He flies over, and it's beautiful on the other side of the wall. And when the mouse turns back, he looks back, and the wall isn't actually there. The wall is invisible.
Oh.
And so when he comes back, he slowly is able to pull his friends through the wall. And for little kids, we just talked about questions. But for bigger ones, like, what is the wall that is separating you from where you want to go? What is your wall? What is your thing that
Saying
is
good
making
morning to the principal.
it? So sometimes we put barriers in our way to get the things that we really want. And so I just was like, oh, that's kind of deep. So I like that book. And then the other book I really like is The Missing Piece Meets the Big O. And you can find it on YouTube. But I would use it for self-esteem. But for but what is really cool is as the missing piece is trying to find, it's like a little triangle. So keeps trying to find something that he will fit with so that it makes a whole. And um, he finds people who put him on a pedestal and leave him there. Or he finds one that's a perfect fit, but then he starts to grow, and the sort of Pac-Man-y kind of thing goes, "You've grown. I don't want someone who'll grow. I want someone who stays the same." And all the little things that it talks about, it's all about relationships and how you don't necessarily need to be someone's missing piece, but you can be your own person and find someone else to be their own person so that you can go together. And it's just an entire book that you wouldn't get until you're older about relationships. So
Mhm.
that's a cool one.
So, I recognized in the first children's book you mentioned that the main character was Latina. And in one of your school counseling magazines that you left in the bathroom, it showed how the majority of children's books feature white people, and
Or animals.
second to them is animals before it's any other races or ethnicities. How important is it for there to be a greater representation in children's books?
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. So that was the other thing that when I was doing my project was making sure that I put down there's children's books. I made sure I denoted which ones where the main character was um, a person of color, or a book that just had multiple people of different colors. When we lived in Macedonia, before we came, there was a black family, and they had a really hard time because people would just come up to them in restaurants and like touch their hair or touch the yeah, because in Macedonia everyone is white, and so they hadn't seen it before, and there was no intention of being um rude, but they were rude. And so one of the things I really looked for was finding books with main characters with people of color so they could see, look, there are people that are not white in this world. And so I continued that in Idaho, which is also very white. and I wanted to make sure that even if they didn't see them in person, there were these books, very positive representations of characters in a book that were various shades because they didn't get to see a lot of that. So I at least wanted to introduce them to people of color.
So, knowing what you know now, is there anything you would do differently about choosing your starter career, about your education to get where you are today?
Um, so one of the best things that I learned when I started the school psychology program was I still get to do all the stuff that I liked about school counseling, except for the career piece, which I really like. But as a school psychologist, a lot of times school psychologists only do testing. And so they don't have the opportunity to consult with teachers and give lessons and do small groups and do individual counseling because they're so much of the time they're focused on testing. So being able to have the experience and honing my skills with counseling, I'm very grateful for that. Um, and then I'm also very grateful. And then, so yes, it's taking me a lot longer, but if I had gotten my school psychology degree in Virginia, um, I don't know that I would have been able to work in Macedonia because there was already a school psychologist. So I don't know if I would have gotten enough training on how to develop a school counseling program so that I could have worked that way in there. And working in Macedonia was very good for my mental health.
Even though you were underpaid.
So underpaid. Oh my gosh. That was really sad. I think it was $5 an hour.
Wow, what the heck?
The first year,
For a
yeah.
master's degree?
And that was with all the bump ups because of all the years I had worked.
I'm not even an associate's degree and I make 4 times
Well,
that.
that's because $5 an hour is not even minimum wage here. So
Yeah.
I did I did end up they ended up that was the local international scale. They ended up putting me on the international scale the next year. And then so by the end I think I was making like 27,000 a year. But that first year I think I made like 8,000 or something.
That's,
It was really pathetic.
yeah, that's crazy. Do you ever use that against other school counselors or teachers? They're like, we're underpaid. You're like, not as underpaid as I was. No.
No, actually, I have not thought of that in a really long time. It sort of blocked it out of my memory.
That's
Um,
fair.
it,
Yeah, teachers are underpaid though. um, More on the career of school counsel, not I guess exactly the career, but the presence of school counselors in school. A Do you feel that school counselors that schools have enough school counselors for the students that they have?
no,
No? You feel like
even even in the school that I was in. So in the school I was in, probably had about 270 students. Um, and ASCA, which is the American School Counseling Association, they recommend one school counselor for every 250 students. And I was also part time with the testing coordinator. So, in some ways, I was a little overworked. The second year, doing a lot of the online testing and testing with the online students, for which there were hundreds of, that was too much. So I let the principal know that, hey, I'm staying here till 6 every night and I am efficient and I can't get my stuff done until then. And so the next year, he was able to hire somebody to do the testing for the online schools. So that school has a good counselor to student ratio, but they have not had a counselor since I've left. A lot of the hard part is that in Idaho, let's say you went got a bachelor's degree and then you got your master's degree, they start you off at the same amount of money as a first year teacher. It doesn't matter that you have a master's degree and you can't do your job without a master's degree. You still get that first year teacher salary. And it's not until you've had 3 years experience that you get a $3,500 bonus for having a master's degree.
Wow.
And still, that's not, it doesn't quite compensate for what you were trying to do as a counselor. And however, I will say I love being a counselor way more than I like being a teacher. So I can't say that I enjoyed being an elementary school teacher, but I do like the counseling aspect. I like teaching little bits, being the guest speaker and then leaving, and not being in charge of an entire classroom.
Okay. So I won't keep you any longer.
What I will do is I will send you my presentation on mental health that I'm going to be giving to a high school next week.
Okay. I can
There's
link
some.
that for if anyone actually watches this, they can see that.
So, teenmentalhealth.org, that is another that's a good website. That's where I got a lot of my information from for the PowerPoint.
Okay. Hope you enjoyed this interview. We got to talk to Julie Rice, my mother, and learn a few things about her career in school counseling and school psychology. I hope you enjoyed this Psyche snack.